everybody can kind of curate the information that they see to reinforce what they think, what they believe. And, a lot of people are aware of this and aware that this is happening and aware that they're doing it. But then I think being aware of it and then making concrete changes to try to step outside of it are two different things.
You're listening to Relish This, the Purpose Marketing Podcast. Here's your host, Stu Swineford.
Hey everybody, Stu here. My guest today is Katherine Baxter. She is involved with a couple of amazing nonprofits, Africa Network for Animal Welfare and American Canary. She and the team at ANAW are doing some really challenging work in Africa to help animal welfare on the continent. We discussed ways to reach potential support audiences through tangential targeting and in general about creating action opportunities for their stakeholders. At American Canary, Katherine and her co-founders are working to create more literacy around the current polarization in media. We had a great conversation about awareness in general and how noticing is the first step toward facilitating change, and how they can leverage existing networks of people already committed to self-improvement, and how those people can be brought into the fold through partnerships with platforms like Calm, Headspace, and Waking Up. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Well, thank you again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. I'm glad this worked out for you.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. So I have a couple intro questions just to tee things up, and then make sure you're cool with kind of the format. The first question is so you're involved with quite a few nonprofit things.
Yes.
Which one is the most pressing or the one that you'd like to talk about? Or we could talk about more than one today for sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, the one that pays the bills is ANAW USA. So that's Africa Network for Animal Welfare. And
Okay.
It's the USA office. So I'm the operations manager for that nonprofit.
Okay.
And then one that I've co-founded with a couple of close friends of mine is called American Canary. So those are probably the two things demanding the most of my time and attention. And, whatever you think is more interesting, they each present different opportunities, different challenges, different internal organizational dynamics and things. So,
Why don't we tee this up as kind of a choose our own adventure kind of deal? I'll let you talk about both organizations as you'd like to, and then we can kind of dive into. Let's go ahead and dive into. Is it ANWA?
Yeah, it took me a little while. I just started the position in July. It's ANAW.
ANAW. Okay. ANAW.
Like a ANAW, a short A at the front.
ANAW. Got it.
African Network for Animal Welfare, ANAW, whichever is easier for you.
Yeah, I was trying to. My brain flipped some things around there. So
I found out after my interview for the position that I'd been saying the acronym wrong the entire time. So that's
fun.
Not a deal breaker.
Awesome. And then I'll start things off here in just a second. Then at the end, I like to kind of wrap things up as we're recording. I'll stop recording and then we'll have kind of a second wrap up to just say, thanks a ton. Just because it feels a little weird when we just kind of bail at the end. So so that would be the only other thing is just if you want to hang on, I'll stop the recording there at the end and then we'll wrap things up. So
sounds great. I like that.
Awesome. Well, if you're ready, we'll get things rolling.
All right. And I hope it's okay that I am slurping on tea. Every now and then.
That's totally fine.
Okay.
I am recording video, but I haven't been using it at all. So don't worry about that. You can, make funny faces or wave your dog around or whatever. Yeah, exactly. But most of the time when I'm doing these at home, at some point my cat starts crawling all over me. And so I have to remember to not do that. So
yes, they like to make at least one appearance per Zoom call, I found.
Yeah, she likes to participate. So, well, we'll just get going then.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Yes. Thanks for being on the show today, Katherine. I have Katherine Baxter from ANAW, which is the Africa Network for Animal Welfare. And she also is involved with American Canary. And so I'd love to have you tell us a little bit about both of those organizations. Sounds like you've kind of been steeped in the nonprofit world. So tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah, I would love to. So thanks, first of all, for having me on, Stu. Really excited to talk with you today. And these two nonprofits, I'll start with the African Network for Animal Welfare, and you did a great job with the acronym there, ANAW USA. It's basically a nonprofit. So I am the operations manager for the USA branch, but our other branch is in Nairobi, Kenya, and they're based there. And what we do is we try to promote animal welfare in Africa through solutions that try to bring together human, animal, and environmental health. So we do that through a lot of different ways, grassroots campaigns, community organizing, legislative advocacy, all sorts of things. And I oversee the USA side of our operations. So that's one side of the nonprofit work that I do. The other organization is called American Canary. And I co-founded that with a couple of close friends, two based in New York and one other based here in Crested Butte. And that's basically a media literacy nonprofit. And we're trying to essentially strengthen democracy and promote civic engagement through media literacy, through just encouraging more mindful engagement, consumption of media, deeper self-reflection on the role of media in all of our lives, and then trying to bring that through to have an impact on how we all engage with each other as citizens online.
Oh, those sound like both sound like amazing organizations. And I grew up in Gunnison, so I'm pretty familiar with the Crested Butte area. So that's cool that you have someone working over there. So in terms of the ANAW engagement, you're the director of operations here in the U.S. So is your role primarily in trying to drive donation engagement? Tell me a little bit more about your role in that organization.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting partnership. So it's kind of this 21st century model where we can kind of both focus on what we do best. And what we do on the USA side is primarily revolves around fundraising, strategic outreach and communications. Also, we do some of the strategic thinking and planning for the organization. So giving them a little bit of space, because we're not doing the on the ground operations. So we can kind of take a little bit of a step back and try to work with them to develop our longer term agenda. And we also try to raise awareness and bring these issues into, the kind of hearts and minds of people here in the USA who can be fairly removed from them. But these are issues that we really believe are going to affect all of us, life on the planet. So just trying to bring those to a Denver, Colorado, and then U.S. audience. So we're based in Denver at the Posner Center for International Development, which is an awesome community of global development organizations. I'm sure you are familiar with them or with that center. And so I hope that answers your question about what we do over here on the USA side of ANA.
Yeah, I was curious. It sounds. I mean, you touched on one thing that's really interesting in that there's diversification in terms of the roles, and where you recognize that the people in you said Nairobi, right?
Yeah, Nairobi.
In Nairobi are, they've got their hands full with on the ground work. So that allows your team here back in the States to do a lot more of that strategic planning and things of that nature. So that that sounds like a great way to split things up.
It does. And we think it's quite a complementary relationship. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are challenges therein,
Sure.
As with any transnational collaboration, cultural differences obviously are a factor, but also I think an asset to the collaboration and to how we work and what we bring to the table kind of as a holistic organization that has input from both sides. So.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of our kind of dispersed working at this point. And I think more of us have been thrust into that these days than in the past. But certainly, it does enable us to tap into resources that otherwise wouldn't have necessarily been um, accessible just through the power of technology. So that's really cool that you guys have managed to do that, and sounds like you're doing it pretty well. When people here over in the States think of animals in Africa, we're usually, I think, thinking of wildlife. Is it poaching and those types of activities what you focus on the most over there?
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely focus on poaching, and actually, what we focus on primarily is bushmeat trade. So I don't know, maybe some people will be familiar with the illegal wildlife trade, wet markets, things like that. But essentially, bushmeat has become an increasing threat to wildlife and to biodiversity across Africa and in Kenya in particular. And what bushmeat is essentially it's a catch-all phrase for any wild meat, for the consumption of wild meat. And what's happening is you have quite a lot of wildlife-human conflict that results from, conflict over land, resources, livestock, and also you have people's livelihoods being increasingly threatened, interrupted, or insecure. And so instead of being able to afford meat, oftentimes what certain communities will do is they'll set snares, which are kind of wire snares that wild animals get trapped in. And then the saddest thing about it is oftentimes the people who set the snares don't even find the animals. They just die a very slow, painful death. So one prong of our work is a sort of anti-Bushmeat campaign, and that involves de-snaring. So we have a team that goes out into the bush and systematically removes snares, which we've removed thousands of snares over the course of, even just the past year, because there's been an increase in that kind of activity. And then we have a veterinary team that kind of goes out and provides direct care and relief to animals that have become entangled in snares. So oftentimes, it'll be around their foot, so they'll need to cut the snare, obviously sedate the animal, and then treat it. And then, oftentimes the animal can walk away, maybe limping a little bit, but they're on their way to recovery. And then we also do a lot of work around vaccination. So we don't just focus on wild animals. We also focus on domestic and companion animals. We also are doing a big campaign around the donkey skin trade, donkey slaughter in Kenya, which is an issue that probably people aren't aware of. But essentially, that species of donkey that is kind of indigenous to Tanzania and Kenya is at risk of going extinct by 2023 because of the systematic slaughter of donkeys through these abattoirs, which there's 5 abattoirs in Kenya, and we petitioned the government to ban and actually to close down these abattoirs, but they've been finding ways around it. And this basically it's fueled by a demand for their skins in China, because there's like some kind of traditional medicine that they use the skins for.
Okay.
Which is really, just heartbreaking. And so that it's not only imperiling the species, but it's also devastating the local communities who rely on these donkeys to survive. So donkeys are being stolen, so that's another issue that we focus on heavily. And then we just do general kind of veterinary care and rabies for rural populations as well.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I saw on the site that there were some spay and neuter type of programs that you were doing. I'm assuming those are for either domestic or feral dogs and cats, I guess. I saw dogs, but certainly there are other animals that we've domesticated. So that's great, because I'm sure that's a challenge in that area as well.
Yeah. And actually, one thing we do on the USA side is we facilitate trips that ANAW and Nairobi hosts, but we kind of organize them on this side where veterinarians here in the United States volunteer, and they go over and we run. One is kind of oriented around spay and neuter. One is anti-rabies campaign. And so we usually, I think, tend to do 2 to 3 trips per year. We have one this year that we're planning for 2021, if everything goes smoothly and we can travel, that'll actually be focusing around kind of bringing education and humane education into focus. So it's a partnering with Be the Change volunteers and an organization called LEAP to try to do some educational infrastructure and connectivity work in a rural community. So yeah, those trips really actually go a long way to kind of supporting these veterinary care practices and also our educational initiatives too.
Oh, that's great. And are vets signing up for that as part of their own training programs here in the States, to become veterinarians, or are these just, things that they would like to do to help out or to have that experience typically?
Yeah, we're trying to start to work with veterinary teaching hospitals. Both my parents are actually vets. My dad was
Okay.
a CSU for like 25 years. And we're trying to work with vet schools to actually build in a kind of One Health certification into the veterinary training that would allow them to go on these trips and get credit for it. But currently, it's all just volunteers, mostly from Colorado,
Okay.
who are doing this on their own dime, who are going and donating their time, their energy, their expertise
Right.
to care for these animals in Kenya.
Well, that's a great
Yeah.
thing for them to do. I know that it's hard enough running a business as a vet,
Yes.
being able to figure out how to peel away for some period of time to go do this in Africa has got to be a challenge.
Yeah,
For sure.
it's remarkable. And there's two ladies actually who lead these trips who have been doing this with ANAW for about, I think, maybe almost 5 years now. One is just so I make sure I give them credit for organizing and kind of bringing the volunteers to the trips. Julie Kelly and then Lisa McCarthy. And Lisa McCarthy has started a nonprofit called Vet Treks. So
Okay.
she partners with ANAW to facilitate those trips.
Cool. That
Yeah.
sounds awesome.
It
So
is awesome.
this year's been an odd one. What are your plans or goals? Where are you trying to go here as we wrap up the year and then into 2021? What are some of the things that you're hoping to accomplish in the next couple of years?
Yeah, good question. Obviously this year has brought a lot of disruptions, especially given a lot of our revenue stream comes from these sorts of experiential trips and through kind of on the ground organizing and campaigning. But we're in a good position. So by next year, 2021, we're really hoping that we'll be able to kind of return to normalcy and to expand upon some of our judicial legislative advocacy work around ending bushmeat trade, ending illegal wildlife trade, and then really, really, really trying to work with local governments to provide opportunities, educational, vocational opportunities to communities that are sort of most notoriously in conflict with wildlife. Because really, we embody a kind of philosophy that you can't really help animals without helping humans. And that, most of the time poaching or bushmeat consumption is fueled by a lot of vulnerabilities, insecurities that are only going to be exacerbated with climate change and all the increasing challenges that we as a species are going to be confronting. So trying to really kind of think a little bit outside the box in terms of how we can promote animal welfare through really invigorating and supporting communities. That's kind of one goal that I have. And then I think also bringing a deeper awareness of the sort of connectedness of human and animal well-being here to a USA audience, and trying to get people to think about the fact that as COVID-19 has kind of brought to life for us all, that our vulnerabilities and our prosperity are intertwined, and that we need to start taking seriously or actually we need to rethink the way we consume and interact with animals across the globe in order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, because it's inevitably going to happen again. But hopefully this has taught us a little lesson about the fact that, storing live animals and slaughtering live animals in these sort of really unsanitary wet markets environments, it's not only cruel and inhumane and just, I think the moral issue of our time, but it's also really not doing us any favors in terms of our long-term health as a human species. So
Yeah,
big
for
goal.
sure. Yeah, those are some big goals, and it's, there are lots of challenges there in terms of how to get those messages out, not only to the governments, which there are challenges there in Africa, obviously, but then out to rural communities in terms of how do you disseminate that once you actually even have a government on board. How do you continue to spread that information? What are you guys? What's the typical plan for that? Or is it to engage with governments first and then have them distribute the information? How does that work?
I think we try to come at it from both bottom up and top down. So trying to think about what are some key pressure points we might be able to apply to governments to try to help shift policy. So ANAW coordinates an annual Africa Welfare Conference in collaboration with the United Nations Environment Program every year. And that does a lot to just kind of raise awareness of these issues and to bring together a really wide representation of African officials, but also a kind of international audience to discuss and brainstorm these issues and to get the messaging up to higher levels. Mm-hmm. But then also, I think including communities in these kinds of changes and trying to show rather than tell how animal welfare and human welfare are connected, has to be kind of at the center of the strategy. And what's really hard about this work, I think actually even more so to a US audience, is that oftentimes it's kind of confronting people with some of their own habits or patterns of behaviors or maybe contradictions in their ethical decision making. And that can be really, really hard just in terms of, creating that impetus to change. And I'm a really strong believer that guilt and shame just sort of shut down everything. They're just totally toxic emotions to bring into any kind of conversation. So I think just engaging with people compassionately to try to bring out more compassion in them, and to try to, again, just show the long-term benefits and the relative, the small cost of making small changes here and there.
Yeah, I'm a big animal welfare guy myself, and it's really hard to wrap your arms around those kinds of behaviors and how to create shifts in people's ways of thinking there when this is the way that they were brought up and their parents' generation was brought up and the generation before that. And so there's this kind of systemic, challenge in that.
Yeah.
And, and then there's a lot of way of life stuff that gets in the way where it's kind of like, well, you're trying to come in and change the way that we do things. And, so really an interesting messaging challenge. Have you developed case studies and things of that nature? So you said show versus tell, which I think is a great way to approach this. Mm-hmm. Have you developed those kinds of materials that demonstrate that how you went into a community over here and were able to, like, I think of ecotourism and things of that nature, which certainly those can be very beneficial to some of these communities in that you're not taking away. You're adding a new revenue stream as opposed to just saying you can't do this anymore. And so you're able to demonstrate, there's another viable opportunity here, a different path. What types of materials like that have you developed?
Well, that's actually something that when I first came on board with ANAW in July, that I immediately thought, we can tell this story better. We can reach a wider audience, because previously we were primarily targeting, like these kind of global officials through the United Nations conference, and then also the people who come directly on these trips with us and have these experiences. But we didn't really have the kind of content production that was running in parallel to that to really get this message out to a wider audience. So that's something I'm really passionate about. I've done some work in documentary film and things like that. So just to bring, I think through film, through various other mediums, film is the one that I think would be most compelling, sort of success stories around these kinds of initiatives and the good that they can do, the kind of harmony that they can produce between animals and humans, and just kind of, again, showing rather than telling that when incentives align, really good things can happen, and both win, essentially. And I think so that's one thing that has been put on hold, obviously, because of COVID. But we're hoping once things kind of resume and we get back to some sense of normalcy next year, we'll be able to launch a sort of short documentary series that's going to be on the back of the work that ANAW was doing in Nairobi.
Gotcha. Are there certain challenges with getting that message distributed to these communities that are kind of the hotspots for these types of conflicts?
Well, I think, again, it's tailoring the messaging to each different community's needs, dispositions, kind of challenges. So obviously, a film around kind of wet markets to the Chinese audience would look very different than something around the illegal wildlife trade to a U.S. audience, to a donkey care and welfare video to Kenyan and Tanzanian communities. So, and I think urban and rural dynamics have to play into that. So trying to tailor messaging around the kind of distinctive relationships that these different communities have with their, animals, will be essential to that. And that just takes a lot of thought.
Yeah, for sure. It's that whole, the challenge of trying to, I'm sure you've heard the anecdote or the story about bodies are floating down the river, and so they put the hospital down at the bottom of the river to take care of all these bodies instead of going up to the top and figuring out how to fix the situation up there. And it feels like there is this top down and bottom up sort of challenge for you guys in terms of getting that message out. Stopping the desire. We'll use the donkey example, but figuring out how to change the behavior in China so that there's no demand for that would certainly, kind of dry up the problem down here. But in the meantime, we're trying to protect those animals that are still around. So, yeah.
And then really petitioning the Kenyan government to make sure that ban holds, because that's something that I know ANAW was doing long before I came on board, to just really, really push for that ban on donkey slaughter and to close down the slaughterhouses. So if you close down the slaughterhouses, then the donkey slaughter theoretically will certainly not be happening, or won't be happening at the same scale.
Right.
But then again, I think one underlying or overarching actually problem throughout all this is the sort of profit incentive around all of these things. So when communities are suffering from, financial hardship or insecure livelihoods, then there's a much more intense incentive to, participate in some of these ecologically harmful activities. So, yeah, I mean, it's a multi-pronged problem, and it'll take multi-pronged approach. But I think it's one that's increasingly getting onto people's radars, especially in this moment. So trying to stay optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. What activities are you guys up to for the, getting on people's radars challenge? How are you getting the message out, in any of the markets that you need to get them out?
Yeah, well, we've primarily been focusing on the Kenyan and Colorado, USA. We have some representatives and board members that are dispersed across the United States, but we're primarily focusing on our communities first, right? Okay. So these two communities, and again, that's we're having a virtual event December 8th, trying to talk, about these issues. It's a Colorado Gives Day virtual event, actually, just to try to invigorate the Colorado community to not kind of stand by and watch these issues play out in front of us. And then, and I think legislatively, there's a lot of stuff going on around One Health. So we're trying to kind of get involved in some of that work. Public health policy, I think, is more and more looking at, the relationship between animals and humans and how that can change to kind of prevent future spread of zoonotic diseases. So, I think at this moment, a lot of things are just kind of waiting. Everyone's just kind of waiting for things to unfold, especially given the political climate and all the other sort of things that are in flux.
Sure.
But I think expanding our market outside of just social media and trying to reach a more diverse audience is certainly something we could use support with and that we're interested in doing. Our staff features on Kenyan news and TV fairly often to talk about animal welfare issues. So they've definitely got that side of things underway. But on the USA side, we could certainly broaden our engagement approach.
Gotcha. What types of people tend to respond to this messaging most of all of the audience that you could go after? Is it what's the demographic of the people here in the States that you tend to reach out to, or that tend to have a successful reach out to?
Yeah, certainly veterinarian communities, universities. We partner with the Institute for Human Animal Connection here at DU, Denver University, and they bring a lot of students on board. I think young people who are increasingly aware of how, our consumption of meat is linked to climate change and emissions. I do think young people are more and more starting to be receptive to this message. Around Colorado, we've had a lot of support from actually different communities, not just vegan and animal rights communities, but kind of across the board, environmental activists. I think other global development leaders who see the importance of bringing these things together and how we kind of approach global development priorities. So encouraged by the kind of diversification of people who are hearing this message and kind of saying, hey, that is a problem. Let's do something about that. Because I do think previously, I know the organization in Denver primarily was targeting older people with money.
Sure. Yeah.
And now I think we're realizing that more and more people want to get involved and support this cause.
Right. Well, a couple things that we have been talking to nonprofits about, particularly in this year, which has been a bit rough on a lot of different nonprofits, particularly in the revenue department, is how do you create mechanisms by which people can help in any way? And as a species, we tend to like to feel like we're part of something and feel like we're contributing to something. And so when we can't, from a financial standpoint, it's a bummer, and people get kind of down. And so creating mechanisms by which your organization can tap into that kind of innate human desire to help can be a very effective mechanism to leverage that community and leverage that network to get your message out there. Yeah. So we have a tendency to go for that, the main ask most of the time, which is donate, or that tends to be the main ask, right? Yeah. Is give us some money so that we can help with this problem. And that's very effective on both sides, in terms of a lot of people feel great when they get to give a little bit of money to help out. But when that's not as great of an option, or as when that is dried up a little bit, figuring out ways to enable people to be supportive in other ways is really effective. So creating, if it is going to the Kenyan government with a bunch of signatures that, like there's a petition that says, we want to save this donkey species. And, I know that it's a little hollow coming from the United States, but if that is something that would encourage them or demonstrate that there is, a precedent here or a desire to save this species, leveraging that army, for lack of a better word, over here to get those signatures collected, is something that I think would be a valuable tool. So, in the way that we talk about that a lot is just creating a mechanism by which it's easy for people to take that action.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And whether that's share this with share this specific thing, or here's this meme that we'd like for you to get out there, or here's this message, or sign this petition, and spread that word. I think there are a lot of people out there who may have a little bit more free time because they're not commuting, or they may just have some spare time on their hands, who are looking for something to do. And so giving them that opportunity is, I think that would be a powerful thing for you guys to look into.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Finding new and, like you said, kind of more accessible ways to allow people to contribute. That's huge. And that's something, because we're so kind of focused on supporting and enabling the team in Nairobi to do that. I think sometimes over here we neglect that, there are small things that we can do to kind of get people together to add their voices to this issue. And I think that could be potentially really powerful. So thanks for that. I will certainly take that on board.
Yeah, and as you do that, certainly the other component of that would be to create a mechanism by which you are collecting information around the people who do take that action. So if you have a kit that's, here's how you can, send a message to your representative, getting their contact information before you give them the message to send. That enables you to create a list of people who are engaged, and maybe they're engaged at a low level now, which is I'm willing to share some stuff, or I'm willing to write my congressperson. But that gives you someone to send information to later, and they may become a donor. They may be deciding to go to vet school, and so they become a vet who volunteers their time to go over and help out. So there's this progression of or escalation of engagement that I think taking that first step and enabling that first step and making that as easy as possible is a good thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. And it also, I think maybe you're also one of those people who subscribe to so many things that I just find myself feeling totally fatigued by looking at my email inbox, and that I'm one of those people who maybe I was so interested at one point in time, but I find myself just deleting most of the emails, probably 95% of the emails that I get on a daily basis, because it almost feels like harassment. So I think trying to find different ways to try to get people on board with the cause, giving them different avenues, reaching them in different ways, I think is so important. And it's such a challenge, given the kind of dominant ways in which we reach out to people right now to get engaged and to care about these issues. So lots to think about. And I appreciate your input. I think that's really helpful, and hopefully that escalated involvement will lead to some concrete outcomes. Nice.
Well, one other thing that's a little bit, it's aligned with what you were just saying in terms of this kind of email fatigue and this message fatigue. And this is something that people are going to say I sound like a broken record sometimes, but one of the things that really bothers me is when we just talk about stuff all the time and don't have either something to do or something that inspires action. And I think a lot of the email that comes through is either very wishy-washy in terms of what it is that you actually want a person to do, or the sender wants a person to do, or it's always about, this one thing, which from nonprofits tends to be donate. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's the goal. We have to meet our budgets. We have to drive toward those revenue goals. However, creating a mechanism by which you're asking for action that's easy to take, and highlighting that as part of the subject line, like action needed, blah.
Yeah.
That, I think, if I would try that and see how that gets people off the couch a little bit, and just starts to get them motivated to do something. If you give them something, give them a task that probably doesn't cost them anything except for maybe the exchange of their email address and 35 seconds of their time, and see how that transitions into actual action. And I think with you mentioned young people getting on board with this, that's a great community to start to to get them engaged and doing things. And it's they're have a boundless energy and the desire to change the world, and so tapping into that, I think, is a very valuable opportunity. And then getting them to escalate that, because they may have wealthy parents that might that they might be able to go to say, hey, this is important to me. Would you donate? Would you kick in $20 to this?
Yeah. You never know. And that's the thing, is you never know where it might lead someone. And also just cultivating an awareness of some of these issues and the kind of connections among them might open up, just a different pathway for young people. So I'm very excited by that prospect, by, I think, creating more actionable ways for people to act upon these issues. For example, email your congressman and tell them to pass One Health legislation. We have a board member who was formerly the president of the ACVMA, AVMA, American Veterinary Medical Association. And he was involved in drafting and in trying to get this legislation passed. One Health is all about humans, animal, environment. It all is interconnected. Let's try to make sure our policies reflect that. And unfortunately didn't go anywhere. So that's certainly something that can be picked back up, that, we as citizens have, have the opportunity to act on. So I appreciate, absolutely. I think that those are all excellent ideas. Appreciate that.
The other thing is coming at it from a tangential kind of direction. And so particularly, I don't know if you're doing any paid search at all, but you could kind of peel off a portion of your paid search and do retargeting on specific, maybe other organizations that people have looked at or have done research into, looking at Facebook and its algorithms and its ability to reach a very specific audience can be super beneficial, and coming at that from a slightly different direction. So you mentioned animal rights people, vegans, people who may have done research into, I don't know, the Audubon Society, or just things like that are around what you do, because those are like-minded audiences, and just kind of figuring out how to come at it from a slightly different angle can be, so you don't have to just go after people who've done research on animal welfare in Africa, and you can kind of come at it from the side a little bit. So those would be some things.
That's smart, because there are so many organizations, which is great, and I think that's wonderful that are doing this kind of work, sort of work, I suppose, and that are marketing it to a U.S. audience. So I think also one of the things for us, one of the challenges and opportunities has been to kind of carve out how we're different, what makes us unique. We're sort of an indigenous, Pan-African organization that's trying, everything we do is driven by an African agenda, led by, the voices of the leaders of ANAW that are there in Nairobi. So I think, just trying to distinguish and differentiate sort of how we do things and what we do from, some of these bigger, very well-known animal welfare organizations.
Like World Wildlife Fund and
WWF, World Animal Protection, Wildlife Direct, Greenpeace. And it's amazing that all of these organizations can coexist. I would love it if nonprofits could genuinely collaborate without it interfering with,
Yep.
bottom lines and those kinds of things. If it wasn't, and I think there are opportunities to do that, and there's increasing interest in doing that. But ideally, we would all make ourselves obsolete, right? There wouldn't be any room for us.
Yeah.
It's the whole
Yeah.
nonprofit and development industry's kind of contradiction, is that we're working towards a world where none of these things need to exist.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think trying to find new ways to, like I said, distinguish ourselves and collaborate. That's
Absolutely.
also a long-term goal.
Well, those are great big challenges. So it's great that that you guys are going after those.
Big picture, sometimes I need to, pull myself back onto the ground. And that's what the boards are for, right?
Sure they are. So tell me a little bit about American Canary. We have a little bit of time left, and
Sure.
And I think that's a fascinating subject, and would love to hear what you guys are doing, because we are very, as connected as we are, we tend to move to our pods, right, and our like-minded groups, and I think that's what you guys are tackling quite a bit at American Canary.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is, I was in academia for a little while. My research was in kind of global education policy, trying to look at sustainable development through that medium. And then I actually taught third grade last year here in Denver at the inner city school, just down on Arapahoe and 24th. And, I have been kind of concerned and cautiously watching. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Twitter. That's probably interesting, given that I am working on a media literacy organization. But I just think there's a increased awareness of how these technologies and how our digital interfaces are transforming the way that we relate to ourselves and to others. Mm-hmm. And to the fabric of our democracy, which is truth, and how we arrive at a shared sense of facts and reality and what's happening. and I think we've been teetering on a kind of, I'll just throw this word out there, just epistemological collapse, breakdown, wherein everybody can kind of curate the information that they see to reinforce what they think, what they believe. And, a lot of people are aware of this and aware that this is happening and aware that they're doing it. But then I think being aware of it and then making concrete changes to try to step outside of it are two different things. So we have come together to try to create not only resources, but also to try to work with schools and teachers and other sort of civic institutions to try to engage people in what we see as the three kind of prongs of being a media literate digital citizen. So there's the technical, the social, and the emotional kind of prongs of that. And we're still kind of in early days. We started this and kind of really launched it after doing a very deep dive into our values and our theory of change and all the rest of it in December. And it's just a fun thing. It's something that I feel really strongly about. I am really passionate about democracy and the relationship between education and democracy. Democracy doesn't work without education. Our education systems are woefully in decline. So, there's a real opportunity to get people to just think a little bit more carefully and mindfully about how they use media and the sort of digital forces that are impacting their lives and my life, all of our lives. And it's something we're all just kind of complicit in. Nobody really consented to it, but yet now it's everywhere. There's no way to, kind of step around it or escape from it. So yeah, it seemed like something that warranted some reflection, and it's been a lot of fun to work on this with some close friends.
Well, that's great. What are you doing to get the word out, or what are the goals for American Canary? What, are you trying to bring more people on board into the movement? What's the thrust there?
Yeah, definitely trying to bring more people on board. So I know Bird, she actually teaches at a university in New York on media engagement, and she's kind of our website guru. And we've steadily been increasing our following, steadily been increasing the number of people who are subscribed to our website. We produce regular content that we really try to, we're not asking really anything of anybody. We're just asking people to kind of reflect. So we're trying to break the norms of what these kinds of emails can contain and what sorts of emotions they elicit. And yeah, we are trying to create some more systematic programming. I think that's our goal for 2021, is to really get concrete programs underway in each of our communities. We're really big on, at the same time that we want to have an online community, we want to do some real work, concrete work with each of our individual local communities, and to empower other community leaders to begin having these kinds of conversations, and to bring people together from different political persuasions, from different backgrounds, different walks of life, to talk about how the media is shaping their view of reality.
Sure.
And then to just try to, I think, overall humanize each other and empathize with each other, which can be really difficult to do when you're only really interacting with people who have a different point of view from you through technology or online.
Yeah, there's an anonymity component, I think, that happens online, and it allows people to regress to their worst form, if that makes sense.
Brains.
And because there's less accountability, and so where in the past we might have had a spirited discussion, things devolve pretty quickly, or can devolve pretty quickly online. I mean, certainly there are some places where one can go to still have a spirited discussion, but a lot of times I think being able to hide behind this screen, and create a persona that makes us feel good for whatever reason. I think that all of that can contribute. When you talk about systematic programming, tell me a little bit more about that, because I think I have a couple of ideas.
Yeah,
maybe.
I would love to hear your ideas. I think just becoming kind of more embedded, we have a few kind of pilot workshops going on with schools and teachers to try to make that a little bit more structured and embedded in, for example, I would love to formalize that a little bit more than I have with Denver Public Schools. And I know one of our other co-founders wants to get this more embedded in her local school district. And then I also think having community events, that's something we're really, really, really keen to do once we're able to do that. And I think we do not want them to be virtual events. So we're just kind of holding our breath until that's a possibility.
Right.
Because I think that defeats the point is, we're trying to bring people together to try to know each other in a different way. And then I think also one of the things we're really keen to do is to provide small kind of seed grants to what we're calling creative canaries, like local people that are, trying to raise awareness of particular civic issues in their community through different arts-based mediums. So those are the kind of three kind of ideas that we have going right now for the kinds of programs that we could deliver and get underway.
Gotcha. A couple of those are challenging. In that
not right now.
It's tough to have an in-person event when we can only have 9 people in a room together.
2021 goals.
Yeah, sure. But I love it. I think there's an awareness piece where people may not even understand that they have a problem, much less what the problem is.
Yeah.
I think I said that right. But that's a component of marketing as well, in terms of, there's an awareness component where the first thing that as marketers, one of the things we're challenged to do is to help people identify, they have this thing that's bugging them, or this itch that they can't quite figure out. And they're trying, they're doing research to try and put a voice to that, and to understand what it is. And so the awareness of the problem and then defining what the problem actually is kind of tends to be that kind of top of the funnel thing. Then once people have an awareness, oh, okay, here's my problem, what are the solutions? Then they start to explore solutions. And so those tend to be the kind of that middle of the funnel engagement that either for-profits or nonprofits can make with people as they're doing marketing. So I'm thinking of it in that from that lens. And then the third step is I want to engage, and I understand that I have this problem. I understand what the solution to the problem is, and now I'm looking for the right partner to help me fix the problem. So that's kind of that third chunk of that journey, typically. And it's just really interesting. I can just totally see that the challenge here is that you have to have someone willing to understand that they are in a bubble, and all of their attitudes and all of the way that they're thinking is shaped by this bubble that they just continue to plop back into on a regular basis. And it's the websites that they go to, it's the news outlets that they watch, it's the people that they hang out with. We do tend to go to that comfort zone, and it's uncomfortable to get out of that bubble, particularly when those bubbles are so opposed. The thinking is very different. And so I think that's a big challenge, is to get people who are willing and interested in figuring out how to escape this cycle of activity and thinking.
And I think what we've found, and there's a really great initiative called the Center for Humane Technology that we've kind of reached out to, and they just released a Netflix documentary basically about, the Center for Humane Technology was founded by a person who used to be the ethicist at Google, Tristan Harris, and maybe you've heard of him. Anyway, and he, I think when you lay it out for people in this way, where Facebook, Twitter, social media, all of these things are essentially trying to get as much of your attention as possible. And they are very adept at knowing what's going to make you stay longer, what's going to make you click the next thing, they're functioning on a kind of attention economy. I think when you give people a sort of narrative to understand how they're being manipulated, not necessarily by other people of a different political persuasion, but by the kind of tech apparatus itself, it helps kind of break that bubble just a little bit. Do you know what I mean? So that's something that's been kind of interesting, to present the way that algorithms are designed and shaped to grip your attention, to make you feel like you have an addiction to your email or to your phone or to your Instagram or whatever it might be.
They do a great job of that. that's how they work.
Exactly. They're $1 billion industry, and that's their end goal. And to recognize that, well, where is that leading? What kind of society is that going to create for all of us? Is that the kind of person you want to be? Is that the kind of society that you want to live in? Is that the way you want to engage with the people that you know, or the people that you don't know, for that matter? And it can be kind of an empowering thing to just suddenly to look at something and to have that realization, oh, they're trying to get me to click on that, rather than to just be, let's go down the rabbit hole. You know, I think you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
It's the noticing piece. That's the first part of all of this, is just, not beating yourself up about it, that you're doing this thing again, but just being like, oh, I'm doing that thing again, where I've been on Reddit for 7 hours or whatever. And
exactly.
And it's like, okay, well, I have a choice here. And
talking about it as well, because I think a lot of people feel a lot of shame around this, and around maybe unhealthy relationships that they have with their technology or with their devices, and maybe their inability to focus, or their lack of productivity, or whatever it might be. And to allow people to just some sympathy and a different way of framing that problem. It's not a personal failure. It's something that, literally there's been billions of dollars invested in figuring out how to make you do that.
How to manipulate people to continue to take this action.
Yeah. So just to help people identify that, come together around it, to not feel badly or shameful, about the way they relate to technology and to digital media. I think those are all steps we need to take for the sake of just our internal sanity and our external shared reality.
I like that thinking. I suspect that there are a lot of people out there who do feel somewhat addicted to their devices, which is really just an addiction to the apps that are on their devices and the dopamine hits that we get when we scroll through and see something that reinforces our way of thinking or gives us some sort of heart that somebody has given us because they liked what we did or whatever. And so my guess is that you do have a very large potential audience base there. So I think that you're not going to have a shortage of people who would like to participate in this. The idea that I had, and it came from you, a couple of the words that you used earlier, you talked about reflection and exploration and things of that nature. And one of the things that I think might be interesting for you is to develop some materials and some programming around the meditation world in terms of creating a series and going to someone like Calm or Headspace or one of the meditation apps and just creating a series around taking a break from social media or taking a break from from your devices or things of that nature, and really giving people something to reflect upon on it. It wouldn't have to be a 28-day series thing. You could probably just have a little mini series of ways to focus one's attention on this idea of escaping this loop that we're in.
I love that idea. I think that's genius. And meditation has been my saving grace for like the last 12 years. And I use Waking Up app. And I first got into it. My research was in Nepal, and I was just struck by the level of like mental presence that people seem to have. They taught meditation in school. The kids were all kind of tuned into the voice in their head, and that it, and this sort of distance that they walked around in between that voice and then just how they were kind of moving through the world. So I think you're absolutely right. I've wanted to bring a meditative mindfulness kind of component into this work, because I think that's where it starts is like you said, that disposition. It's that noticing first. And in order to do that, you have to also have a little bit of meta awareness of your mind and how it's operating. So I think I will absolutely bring that to the other board members, and we'll take that as far as we can.
Oh, I love it. I think it's great. I've been using Duolingo to try and learn Spanish over the last year or so. I've dipped into it in the past and it just didn't stick, but I'm almost to my full year of at least once a day practice. And one of the things that comes up on Duolingo on a fairly regular basis is 15 minutes a day can help you learn a language. What does 15 minutes of social media do? And just that message
That's scary.
is reinforcing the awareness and the noticing piece, because when I, having that repeated to me over and over for the last year, essentially, when I do hop into a social media app, I'm like, oh wait, I could go to Duolingo instead. And so it just, it's there, and it's that noticing piece.
That sounds so. I've wanted to try Duolingo. I've never quite gotten the discipline to do it, but maybe this conversation will inspire me to go off.
Well, I wasn't wanting to derail our discussion there about social media and media in general, but it was just an interesting way to frame that awareness piece, and so just giving people that. It could be, 15 minutes a day of meditation, blah, blah, blah. What does 15 minutes of social media do besides, make you angry?
That's a
and
great way to
whatever.
frame it. I mean, and that's something that, people, it's really easy to waste time. And that's something you'll never get back. But it's something we all do. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody else, especially when the world just feels very overwhelming. And it's hard to look, to find. And I guess one thing you said earlier about how we get that dopamine response from these different things, it's this sort of as close as we can come to a feeling of actual connection mediated by these sort of digital platforms and technologies. And so, when you're lacking that kind of connection in person in your life elsewhere, it can be really easy to sort of take refuge in these things and then before you know it, a year has gone by and and I think I don't want people to have that feeling of wasting time or potential or energy. And so I hope that this initiative, this organization can do something to help interrupt that cycle sooner rather than later. That's sort of the goal for me.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. So, wow, it's been an hour. This has flown by. I really appreciate the time that you've taken to talk with me today. I like to ask a few questions at the end of these, and I'm getting better about being consistent about asking them, I think. But the first question I have for you is, it's an easy one. Where should people go to find out more information about your two organizations that we talked about today?
Yes. Excellent. So the first organization, ANAW USA, probably the best way is just to go directly to the website, which is www.anawusa.org. The other organization, American Canary, probably the exact same, www.americancanary.org. We're on social media, both organizations, and all of those are linked directly from the website.
Great. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad people will be able to find you guys and learn more about both of those great organizations that you're part of. Yeah. The second question I have is about action. So we talked a little bit about action earlier today. Yeah. What, if anything, would you like people to do after listening to this show?
Because you had kind of mentioned that this would be a question that's asked, and I really have been thinking about it. If I had to pick one action that I think would do some good, I think, and this relates to both organizations' mission, it's just to think about the kinds of presence that you're bringing into whatever work that you're doing. So just think, and think about the kinds of decisions that you're making, why you're making them. Is there room for more reflection? I think one of the lessons that I've learned from doing nonprofit work for a long time is that the things that do the best are the organizations that do the best are the ones that are kind of brought to life with joy and friendship and connection and, people who value and trust each other. So just try to think about the person that you're carrying into each room. And is there a way to improve the kinds of conversations that you're having, to just be gentler, kinder, to encourage others not to get sort of trapped in cycles of guilt and shame. So I think the action is an emotional one, more than a practical one, if that is in alignment with our conversation so far.
I think that's fantastic. So what were your takeaways from our discussion today? Is there anything that you're going to definitely take back to the team?
Yes, absolutely. I think for American Canary, your idea to create a kind of short mini lesson, mini series, and to either for us to curate it ourselves or to reach out to one of these other platforms with a segment particularly around mindfulness and social media or media use. And then also for ANAW USA to give people much more direct, actionable, simple ways to get involved and then to escalate their engagement. And I have 3 ideas that I've kind of typed that I've got in my phone now that I'll take over to the organization, and hopefully that'll give people a way to engage with these issues beyond just the kind of transactionary model that a lot of nonprofits default to.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to hear how both of those go. I hope you keep me in the loop in
Yes.
terms of how those initiatives pan out. And I would certainly encourage everyone to go check out the websites and see how they can become involved. And again, thanks for being on the show today. That was super fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. I really, really enjoyed this.
Me too. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye. All right, there you have it. Another great episode of Relish This, the purpose-driven marketing podcast. If you want to continue the conversation and see how we can unearth some gold for your organization, head over to relishstudio.com/podcast to sign up to be a guest on the show.